we are. It's another episode of Articulated Points. I'm Philip. This is Patrick. I think it's safe to say it's been way too long since we did a full episode like this. What do you think?
Yeah, I managed to grow a beard during that whole time. I used to be, I think I was 20 the last time that we recorded, and now I have this gray beard.
It's been 84 years.
I think we officially entered Season 2 whenever you got the beard. But now I don't know where we are now that I have a beard. It's not permanent, though. This won't stay forever.
We can't both be Riker.
That's very true.
Yes, that quarantine beard is coming in very nicely. I see that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, this episode, we're going to start off talking about the Hasbro Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter movie figures. Then Patrick's going to show us some Transformers Action Masters, and then we'll take a look at a quick segment on the Ghostbusters by Kenner.
The real Ghostbusters, not the other one, not the Filmation. The real Ghostbusters.
It's the real Ghostbusters.
So you wanted to start us off with some Street Fighter. I know that you're kind of the two of us, you are the more diehard Street Fighter fan than me, although I was definitely a fan of the video game. So what exactly did you want to talk about?
Well, I kind of feel like you're putting me on the spot by saying that I'm a diehard Street Fighter fan, when really I just kind of really like the Hasbro Street Fighter action figures to a point. So in 1993, as part of the G.I.Joe subset, Hasbro put out Street Fighter 2 figures. I've heard stories of how they got the license, but while I can't verify that info, I really don't want to spread any rumors right now. Suffices to say, it might not have been strictly on the up and up. But Hasbro nonetheless got the license from Capcom and started making a line of Street Fighter figures. From what I've heard, the announcement of the 1994 Street Fighter movie kinda took Hasbro by surprise, which meant that they needed to get their Street Fighter 2 figures to market faster than they anticipated. And I think that explains why the G.I.Joe Street Fighter figures look the way they do.
Yeah, I can remember whenever the announcement... Well, I guess it wasn't an announcement. I was, at the time, corresponding with other collectors, and we would manage to get lists ahead of time of what was going to be coming out. And whenever Street Fighter was on the list, at first all I knew was that it was going to be G.I. Joe Street Fighters. I did not know any of the character names, but I was already playing the Street Fighter video game, and I kind of assumed that what was going to happen was it was going to be similar to something they had done with, Eco Warriors, that were probably trying to fend off Captain Planet a bit, Ninja Force that was kind of there because of the popularity of Ninja Turtles. So you had these subsets of G.I. Joe that definitely came from something else being popular, and G.I. Joe kind of wanting to be a part of the hot ticket item at the time. So I really didn't know at first that Street Fighter G.I. Joe would actually be Street Fighter characters. So I think maybe I'm a little more warmed up to the fact that they aren't looking exactly like they did in the video game than you may be.
Well, I will say, at the time they came out, one of my friends, my older brother, and my friend's older brother, who was friends with my older brother, we all played Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. And it wasn't the Turbo Edition, so we couldn't play M. Bison, but we loved it. We were just button mashers. We were never really any good at at the game. But so one of the Street Fighter 2 figures, when I guess I found out through a commercial or seeing them in the store. I'm not quite sure now. It's been a while, but I was excited. And then of course I got the figures, and well, I won't say it's a total letdown, but it's just not quite right. Street Fighter figures really came out in two waves. And the first wave, this is probably the best of the first wave, which is Guile. And you can see he's made using Roadblock and Road Pig parts. Actually, it looks pretty decent. You think about it, you wonder why they didn't use 1986 Sergeant Slaughter mold, since that's basically Guile's costume right there.
Yeah, I think that we were going to touch on that. Are we going to touch on that later, or should we just mention now that the earliest pictures of Street Fighters, I mean, kind of feeding into what you were saying about these being put together quickly, the insert catalogs from, you know, that yearly would come inside with a vehicle, the pictures of the figures that they have, as well as the pictures that appeared in the Hasbro Toy Fair catalog, are kind of figures that have been cobbled together. And Guile actually did use Sergeant Slaughter's body. I think he had the head of Bulletproof on a Sergeant Slaughter body, so it would have been really nice, I think, to have gotten that, but who knows. Yeah, maybe they just wanted the figure to be... I mean, the Road Pig body is probably the largest torso, largest muscle torso in the vintage line, so maybe that's what they were going with.
Next we had Ryu, or Ryu as the commercial like to say, and you know, American kids in the 90s like to say. He's not so bad. Definitely just a slice repaint in white, but for the most part it kind of works. He should have the bare arms.
This was one of the figures that for some reason took me a long time to get. I think that of the Wave 1, he's one of the ones that's more popular. Whenever I first saw Wave 1 in the store, it was just Ken on the floor somewhere down the aisle, like somebody had dropped him or something. So I didn't end up seeing Ryu for quite some time.
Now here's where things start getting a little off the rails, when you start looking at M. Bison. Credit for the legs, those shin guards, they're very much in the style of M. Bison. I loved that. But then, you know, you start looking at the top, and it's a baseball jersey he's wearing. That's not quite right.
Somebody has to be on the Shadowloo team.
It's a team of one, and he cheats. And where's the shoulder pads? That threw me off, because there's shoulder pads on the card artwork, right?
Yeah, they are.
So I was kind of wondering what happened there. But, you know, at the time I let it slide. And then we had come to Blanca, who's better dressed here than he is in the game. This is clearly just a Road Pig body with a new head.
The thing that I really like about pre-production Blanca is that it is just 100% straight up just Road Pig repainted, and then he has kind of like a Bride of Frankenstein, like wind kind of look to his hair. It's like all pushed back and very barrel shaped, which is a little weird. And the other thing that's funny is that all these figures appear kind of together in a diorama picture, and Blanca, the player 1 and player 2 Blanca is blue and different blue, rather than either one of them really being green.
Then came Ken, who's a Ninja Force Storm Shadow, and we have our first instance of Hasbro painting over gloves with very obvious clothes folds on them. So he's got very wrinkly hands. And okay, he's got more than he should, but he's Ken, he's in a big red suit. That worked for me. What really didn't work for me in the first wave is Chun-Li, because Chun-Li's iconic, you know? And giving her a reworked Ninja Force Scarlet, yeah, she's in Chun-Li colors, but that's not really Chun-Li.
Again, I was kind of happy to have gotten Chun-Li at all. At this point, obviously, it had been there's quite the track record for not having a lot of female G.I. Joe figures. And the other thing that's a little bit different about Chun-Li than the others is that she was using a figure that was kind of still pretty new. Ninja Force Scarlet actually was from 1993, and Chun-Li was from 1993.
Yeah, it's kind of a standard practice now to get, you know, a retooled head within the same year, but that really wasn't the case back in 1993.
That's right, yeah.
Now, you did talk about Player 2 colors a second ago, and those were figures that came with vehicles. And I actually had one as a kid. It was the Sonic Boom tank. It's a green recolor of the Paralyzer tank, and actually I think it's a kind of a better look for it, honestly. He came
yeah,
paradoxically with a Guile in tan, though. You know, you'd think the green tank would have the green Guile, but what do I know?
The file card depicts him as having white pants with orange camouflage spots, and that's not at all the figure that we got. I thought that it was a great idea at the time to do the Player 2s as vehicle inserts.
Now, the crazy thing, though, is every figure in Wave 1 had a Player 2 recolor packaged with a vehicle. So if you wanted all the Street Fighter figures, you kind of had to have a parent who was really willing to shell out the money for that. Uh, Chun-Li and Blanca were packaged with a retool of the Dreadnought Thunder Machine.
It was very nice for them to put 2 figures in some of these packs, too.
Ryu and Ken came in a retool of the Toxo Lab. M. Bison came in the Crimson Cruiser, which was a red version of the G.I. Joe Badger. Again, it's a recolor in a Player 1 colors, but given a Player 2 deco.
I think that it's kind of interesting the way that those played out as far as how they were packed with vehicles, because it does make me wonder how much they knew about the movie, because in my mind, having been in Street Fighter 1, Ryu has always kind of been the main character of Street Fighter, but then you get to the movie and Jean-Claude Van Damme is playing Guile, the American. And I kind of wonder if maybe Hasbro knew that that was coming because, you know, Ryu is paired with Ken in a 2-pack of vehicle drivers, and Chun-Li with Blanca in a 2-pack of vehicle drivers. And then you have the protagonist and antagonist of the movie single-packed. But this is well before the movie, so maybe they knew that that's what was going to happen.
I should point out, these figures did come with accessories, but for the most part, they're not important. They're like 1993 era weapons trees. Nothing really plays into the character of the figures. Some of them have missile launchers with grappling hooks. The ones that still retain Ninja Force spring-loaded features don't have them. But there are just a few accessories that are worth noting, and I'll note them right now. So, M. Bison not having his shoulder pads, that was an issue for me, and then a few weeks later after I have my M. Bison figure, I notice suddenly in the package he's got shoulder pads, as does the vehicle driver. There are 2 versions of each of these M. Bisons, with and without the shoulder pads. The shoulder pads are a soft plastic silver version of Road Pig's armor, and it's actually glued to the figure's chest. So you can remove it with little effort, but you might damage the figure underneath.
I loved whenever that came out. I think that the M. Bison that I got, by the time I was able to find him, because these were pretty popular, by the time I was able to find him, he had the shoulder pads.
Now, a little while later, the Wave 2 figures started coming out, and honestly, it kind of killed my enthusiasm for the Street Fighter line in G.I. Joe. I got all of Wave 1 single-carded and one of the vehicle drivers, and I was looking forward to Wave 2, but I know that the costume changes irked me a little bit, even as an 11-year-old kid. But I put up with it, and then Wave 2 came out, and I saw Zangief. Like, his legs, flesh, bat legs, not
It's bionic
right.
Zangief. I think that they're trying to replicate, like, the scarred leg look that Zangief has, but boy does it not work.
I don't know if they were trying to replicate the scarred look so much as they were just using the waist as the belt, because that's kind of roughly the shape it's supposed to be, and then didn't want to change out more of the mold. So top half is Nagahide, bottom half is bat. And it's easily the worst figure in the Street Fighter 2 subset.
I would agree, but I don't agree that Wave 2 was a downer because of that figure. You must have really hated that figure.
So we also had Vega, who is Banzai with a new head. Again, another 1993 figure. And Balrog, who uses Big Boa's body, which makes sense since that's the only figure released prior to this that actually had boxing gloves. It kind of works. He really doesn't look like Balrog from the game, but I can appreciate that they did at least give him boxing gloves and remember that he is, in fact, a boxer. Now, yeah, to your point, there are some of the best Street Fighter 2 and Hasbro Street Fighter figures as a whole figures in the second wave. And I don't know if maybe I missed seeing them on the shelves or not, but the second half of that wave I really should have paid more attention to, because Sagat, Dalzim, and E Honda, these actually look like they came from the video game. And it is some of the best sculpting in G.I. Joe history, period. I get some people don't necessarily like E Honda because he's a really big, mostly naked fat dude, but he's got his fabric skirt going on. He does have this annoying leg kicking feature, which is really hard to get under control, and that does also mean he's got restricted leg articulation, so it's just a swivel. It's a non-standard buck. This is very large proportion-wise, and to get a sumo wrestler of any sort in G.I. Joe is just unheard of.
Actually, if you check, all three of them were a non-standard buck, because Sagat and Dalsim are made on a taller buck than what the normal G.I. Joe one was. I believe Joe Declassified at one point had uncovered the taller buck. I don't have images of that, unfortunately. It may have been at JoeCon at some point, but it definitely was a taller figure. So they had, I think they had elongated the legs and maybe the torso, but you could definitely tell that those are some of the good ones. I know that I was excited because the character that I would usually play as was Dalsim whenever I would play Street Fighter 2. So it was almost an extra treat for me whenever they did make a Wave 2 and he was completely newly sculpted. It's a good figure.
Dalsim, you know, he's there. The skull's on the chest, the hobo pants. It's all what you want to see. Sadly, you can't stretch his limbs out. He is made of plastic, and that's just not possible. And then Sagat, the scar across the chest. This is actually really gnarly, and I think a little bit of a departure from his design that Hasbro took, maybe at the time, because you look at that scar, that's not really a scar, that's torn flesh. That is musculature you see underneath, and then little flaps of skin folded over. It's kind of gross.
Yeah, he's definitely got some problems. He shouldn't be doing any fighting.
He shouldn't be out in the open air. That's gotta sting.
That's true.
So those three figures really ended the Street Fighter II line on a high note.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that the pictures of these pre-production figures are one of the biggest things that taunted me in the later years. Just loving the way that things are made. The weird thing about Bison not having the shoulder pads is that in this concept picture, he does have the shoulder pads. He definitely has the head and the hat from Red Star.
So in 1994, the Street Fighter movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia came out. And, you know, people either love this movie or hate it. Me, I'm in the category of thinking it's so bad it's good. I kind of get a thrill out of the terribleness of it, but that's a discussion for a different podcast, I think.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about the toys. Now, Hasbro did put out little mini-figure packs of the characters, but we're not looking at that. We're just sticking straight to the 3 3/4 inch figures. And here is where, ironically, the Street Fighter II figures had a chance to shine. Because from what I know, these were what were intended to be released under the G.I. Joe banner. I'm going to start with one of the easily the peg warmers of the line is Ken Masters. And right away you can see that's a proper Ken costume, complete with bare feet.
I do wonder how they chose which ones would be new, though, in this line and which ones would be reuses. But go on, I'm curious.
Next up is Blanca. Blanca is lacking knee articulation, which is kind of a bummer, but otherwise, that's a pretty solid look for him. He's animalistic body and arm and leg hair, even spurs on the ankles, which I guess are really meant to be more...
shackles.
Yeah, shackles. But it's cool. I wish he was in more of a traditional forest green than this kind of turquoise thing, but I get it. They're trying to differentiate the colors a bit from the 93 release.
Yeah, and whenever I mentioned that Blanca pre-production picture where he was blue and other blue, this is kind of pretty much that other blue.
And Bison. Look at that. Shoulder pads. And a soft goods cape. He's got glow-in-the-dark hands, which is why they're weirdly translucent. And he also comes with either a black cape or a red cape. I prefer the black cape because that's, again, more game accurate.
I like to just collect them all and buy both.
Dalsim comes with a lab coat. Because in the movie, he's a scientist for some reason. It's the same mold as the Street Fighter II one, but they gave him purple shorts. So while he didn't get a second Player 2 recolor in the G.I. Joe line. The movie line kind of continues the traditions.
Yeah, and it definitely speaks to the quality of that figure that they didn't need to change anything as far as the tooling goes.
Which is why Sagat comes with red shorts and mint green trim, so he's a festive Sagat. E Honda has the white skirting here and blue face paint. It's red, the fundoshi underneath. We don't really need to get a great look at that. We have a proper Chun-Li. This is really the figure I wanted when I got my 93 G.I. Joe Chun-Li. Weird to me, though, is that they resculpted the head. Most of the recurring characters in the movie line use the same head sculpt. I'm not quite sure why this is different. It doesn't particularly look like the actress, Ming Na, from the movie.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if they just weren't happy with the way that the other one looked, or if maybe whatever sculpting buck they were using just made it easier to make a whole new one. I don't know. That's good. That's a very good question.
It's a better upgrade figure game accuracy-wise, but I'm not so keen on the way Vega turned out. He's got this action feature where you got this string coming out the back of his arm, and you're supposed to kind of pull it back, and it launches the hand forward, and it just looks weird. He does come with a removable mask, so you can see his beautiful visage underneath.
Yeah, he's definitely a good figure. I think that one of the key advantages of his action feature, while it definitely doesn't look so much like an arm, and it's weird that he is launching his entire hand rather than just his claws, the nice thing is that if you unscrew that figure, the cavity and the mechanics for where the arm goes in is completely the same as another arm, like a normal one. So you can just pop on arms from a different figure and it looks fine.
That is an advantage, so it's not a total loss. I actually have a customized arm I use to swap out normally. Strangely, though, we don't get every figure in a proper body. So Zangief, he's definitely an improvement, but now he's stealing Road Pig's wardrobe. Balrog has decided to put on a t-shirt. This is the body that comes from Salvo. It's nice as it is, but the silver ammunition wrapped around the legs, not exactly a Balrog look, you know?
Yeah, not at all a Balrog look, but an outstanding figure. Like, there's just something about the colors on that figure that there's nothing too wild about it. The blue is definitely a lighter blue. It definitely has some pop to it, even though they are all like a combination of relatively subdued colors. And then the thing that I really love about that figure is that his boxing gloves had the color changed on them. I think the version 1 of Balrog is good because red boxing gloves match the game. But they're so similar to what came with Big Boa to begin with, that it really was nice to have a little bit of variety and change it up. And you don't actually have to have the Big Boa figure to put the boxing gloves on a G.I. Joe. That's one of the great things about the compatibility across the line. So I thought that it was nice that we were getting the boxer of Balrog without having to use the only one boxer that appeared in the G.I. Joe line as a body. This is one of my favorite figures from this wave, even though it looks entirely different than how he should.
There were two names from the G.I. Joe line I haven't brought up yet, Ryu and Guile, that I have not shown so far. Ryu, for whatever reason, he was advertised in the commercial. He was shown on the packaging. He was not released. There are samples that exist in the wild. He's very expensive to come by, and I do not own one, and that saddens me.
I don't have one yet. I've played with one. If you stick one of his legs out and press his head down, his torso pivots, so it gives a really quick kicking motion. That's why he's kind of got a beefy neck to him. And I would imagine that since he was one of the more involved mechanical action features, that may be why he got pushed later in the line, and then whenever the line got chopped, he didn't end up making it.
And then we come to the Guiles. And I say Guiles plural because there's a lot of Guiles. Because it's Street Fighter movie, this seems to be the one area where they conceded that maybe a toy should look like its actor, especially its lead actor. So all but one Guile in the Street Fighter movie line has a attempt at a Jean-Claude Van Damme head. How successful they are in making it look like Jean-Claude Van Damme is up to you.
I think it looks great. I look at the figure and I know who it is instantly.
So this is Sonic Boom Guile. This is sort of your default Guile, with a body that really is sculpted to look like Guile from the video games. But all the Jean-Claude Van Damme Guiles have this weird variation where they either do or do not have the eyelash line painted. Frankly, not having the eyelash line painted makes for a freaky looking action figure.
It was just a revision that happened because all those Guile figures were basically another wave of figures. I don't know if it was wave 2 or 3, but they definitely came all together, I believe. I actually saw all the Guiles at KB. There were plenty of those, but there were figures that I never saw in the store. I never saw a Chun-Li. I never saw a Balrog or a Zangief in the store.
I really only saw Blanca and the Guiles in store.
The movie stuff that I saw all the time for sure was the Guile wave.
There were vehicles in the Street Fighter movie line, and they did have their own unique character toys. So here is Hella Fighter Guile, again with the Hasbro Street Fighter 2 head. So this is the one Guile from the movie line that does not have a Jean-Claude Van Damme head. It's the same build as the Street Fighter 2, just in this blue and white kind of UN deco that was the color scheme in the movie for the good guys. For some reason, the movie got in their head that good guys were blue, bad guys were red.
They have to have that kind of quick cue for the general audiences, I think.
Sagat came with a redeco of the Snowcat, and he had purple shorts, which I think actually matches the Snowcat. So, you know, rare instance of color coordination.
I think it does. Yeah, the Snowcat's called the Devastator.
It's sadly not green and purple, it's just purple. We have a black M. Bison from the Shadowloo headquarters set, which was a repackage of the 92 G.I.Joe headquarters, but with not as many parts.
I think that in order to cut costs, what they did was they eliminated one of the steel molds. So they just didn't run that one mold, and that meant that you didn't get that like, it looks kind of like a vehicle repair part that flips down in the back, as well as some of the stuff in the front. There were just pieces missing, but one of the things that's really weird is that the hinges for that, the pins for the hinges were told along with some of the other accessories that were included. So you do get the pins to attach those parts, but you don't get the parts.
Well, there is a 2-pack figure set that Hasbro put out that came with this little plastic stand.
Yeah.
And it's blown plastic, real thin, real breakable. Thankfully, mine hasn't broken. This is like the one Street Fighter movie set I got as a kid, and I still have this part intact. But it came with a Guile in costume colors that are actually from the movie, if you ignore, of course, the logo on the shirt. And it came with an M. Bison figure with a new head sculpt. The Guiles we've been obliquely referring to, there's a wave of figures that were really just Guile. And that was the one time, you know, they were really cashing in on that. Jean-Claude Van Damme's face is plastered all over the card art. When previous to that, it was a painting of the character as it looked in the video game. Strange as it is, they were really banking on Jean-Claude Van Damme to sell toys. If I'm doing my job right, I've just inserted a picture showing the range of the different Guiles they had in the line. And you can see it's really just a Jean-Claude Van Damme head on a G.I. Joe body that's been recolored. Some of them are actually really nice recolors. Night Fighter Guile, with that Snake Eyes body, really gives a lot of people an idea to make a custom Snake Eyes so he's a little more in his black colors rather than the bright orange and blue that the 91 figure had. Like I mentioned, every Guile with the Jean-Claude Van Damme head came with or without the eyelash line, but those also coincided with sometimes different color variations, like Paratrooper Guile having 2 different colored helmets, as well as his G-suit either having brown accents or none. And it's actually weird that the one with more paint is the one lacking the eyelash line. It is a pity, though, that we get this great reuse of the 92 Ace mold, and he doesn't have a jet to fly. Well, I like to use the X-16 because that's a 2-seater, and Ace needs a co-pilot. So he helps fill out that jet.
It's definitely not a figure to miss. The fact that they made these differences on some of them makes them two figures that are very worth tracking down both.
And there's another one, which is Navy SEAL Guile.
Yes.
As you can see, one's got yellow accents, one's got black. Again, the one missing the eyelash is the one that has more colors. They also come with recolors of the Eco Warriors backpack, and those have different tubes. And weirdly, the tube colors line up with the variations. Yellow goes with yellow, black goes with black. I don't know why it's like that, but it is.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones that I still haven't decided which figure I like better. The yellow one, obviously, it stands out a little more, but the black one, it looks like it's more subdued. You're getting the best of both worlds with those two releases, and I really am happy that they did that.
Now, there also were some 12-inch Hall of Fame bodied figures that Hasbro put out. We're not really going to get into those today, because again, we're just focusing on the 3 3/4 inch figures.
We'll just mention the crazy squished head, short haircut. Like, they took video game Guile and just gave him a haircut for the 12-inch one that appears in the Toy Fair catalog. That figure's nuts. We definitely need to show that.
Yeah, that really kind of sucks.
This wave of figures that they initially showed was super crazy because Paratrooper Guile, he was pretty much what we got. But the Navy SEAL Guile, instead of being made from the parts of Wetsuit, he was the 1994 Shipwreck with the Jean-Claude head. So, and it looks like maybe, is that I'm not sure if that Squirter's from Jurassic Park or which toy line that is, but he's not holding the Eco Warriors Squirter at all. So that would have been a very different figure, I guess. The picture of all of these really is just a Guile head on the old body. They have not really painted much of anything on these. One of them is also the Rock Trooper Guile. Instead of being the more recent version of Dusty at the time, he's actually the version 1 Dusty. And then the bird included, instead of Raptor's bird, it is actually Freedom. So that's a little bit interesting. I like to imagine what that may have looked like if they would have repainted the body from a version 1 Dusty. The Sonic Boom Guile is actually painted, instead of being in those UN colors, he's in the more traditional version 1, or I should say player 1 Guile colors. And Arctic Assault Guile, instead of being Blizzard, which actually may be the better one, I think in this case we may have gotten the more vintage figure. He's the iceberg body, but they did paint some camouflage on him, which is interesting. And probably the one that gets people the most excited is Night Fighter Guile. So instead of being the version 4 body, he's actually the version 2. So it would have been very interesting to see version 2 Snake Eyes at retail again, and in the picture, he actually has Timber next to him. So it kind of would have been cool to see some of these older G.I. Joes reissued at the time. That didn't end up happening for all of them, but I am really happy with the figures that we did get.
Yeah, it's almost like it was just more proof of concept than actual idea of what the figures should look like. So they're just kind of, I wonder if they were just really in a time crunch when they put that page together.
Interestingly, the Helifighter Guile, and this is where I get really confused at the timeline for all these various Guiles, is if you look at the Helifighter Guile inside that catalog, it is the Jean-Claude Van Damme head, which would indicate to me that maybe they were intending on using that head. But we have some samples to look at here of some other pre-production Street Fighter stuff. I guess maybe starting chronologically, we can look at the stuff that was for the G.I. Joe Street Fighter 2 first. And we have here a version of Ken that is earlier, and they definitely were kind of paying attention, trying to add more color to the figure, because this earlier pre-production Ken doesn't have any red on the torso. The throwing stars and the hand grenades that are up on his shoulders, they are actually done in black. And we actually have an earlier a test shot of that also has the white fabric on it. So those two are somewhat interesting. Not as interesting as some of this other stuff. We have here an M. Bison that is bagged. And it being bagged, it actually has a green tag on it. Now, what a green tag is, it is a communication that gets attached to a sample that kind of says some more information. Whether or not this is signed off, if it's signed off and it's a green tag, that means it's final. This is the sample that they're going to use for quality control. This is the one that has been approved, and we're going to use this going forward. This particular green tagged M. Bison is not that. It has not been signed off on, because if you look on the back, under the deviation section, nothing has been checked in, and the desired standard spot has not been checked in. So this is not the one that is final. But this last thing is written in hand, and it says, running change, match flesh color with PMS 156. I'm not sure if the flesh color they're referring to is the head, or if they're referring to the part behind the glove. But what this does mean, and where I've been a little lax in my duties, we probably need to, as variation hunters, to take a look to see if we can find that M. Bison, because there should be one out there produced, since this was a running change and not a correction prior to production.
You're passionate.
Moving on, we have like a test shot for movie M. Bison that is interesting because it uses the corrected version of that hat, but then it is a test shot for the other one that we have a picture of, which is the movie one, but the cape is not on here, which is interesting. I don't know how late in the game that would have been added, but this does look like an FEP, and it is missing the glow-in-the-dark hands. So that was a great feature that was added to the figure that is not here. And the other thing that is very strange is that his shoulders, well, I should say his bicep, has like a splash of blue paint on it. The shoulders are red instead of silver. Like the shoulders ended up being silver when they were released, which did a nice job of looking like his shoulder armor. But this bit of blue is strange because if you turn the figure around and look at it, it's only on the front of the figure. It's not on both arms, it's only on the front of the left arm. What do you make of that, Philip?
I don't know why it would be blue, though. It weirds me out.
The movie flesh tones that were released were a little bit darker than the G.I. Joe flesh tones. And here we have samples of both Ken and Sagat, where you can see that the samples that were coming back were actually in the earlier G.I. Joe Street Fighter II flesh tone. It was a little more matte, I want to say, with the Street Fighter movie stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't shine as much.
I have a theory on what these two things are. I'm going to show you one of them first. And this first one I'm going to show, we'll insert the pictures here, is an M. Bison that is carded, but it has the Raul Julia head, and it is the M. Bison with the glow-in-the-dark hands. But my thought is that whenever they were going to change this head, it's quite likely that would have been a change that would have come later, and that maybe this figure would have been packed in with the Ryu wave. So if we had gotten Ryu, we probably would have also gotten M. Bison in red, in the Player 1 colors, with the Raul Julia head.
You know, what if we're wrong? What if this is just meant to be a different M. Bison head that looks more like the game M. Bison and less like Kurt Russell?
Yeah, that is a very good point. This looks so poorly like Julia that maybe it really isn't him. I just kind of associate it with him since it's the movie head and he was the movie actor. So that could be incorrect, which I think that you and I talked about this the other day pertaining to this second figure that I'm going to show, which is a carded Ken Masters that has a revised head sculpt that we did not ever get. It's a little bit weird. You pointed out that it doesn't really look like the actor that's in the movie, so that kind of gives some weight to the possibility that the other head is not meant to be Julia. I would imagine that actor likeness rights were important, and maybe that's exactly what we're seeing here, is that they wanted to update the heads to look more movie-esque. But it is kind of interesting to see that they were going to kind of change the Ken head.
To that head theory, you know, going back, they changed the Chun-Li head and they changed the Ryu head, so maybe that was a plan. Who knows?
That is true.
And, of course, they changed the Vega head.
Yeah, that is true. So maybe just changing all of them from those original G.I. Joe heads would have been good. Maybe it would have been nicer to have seen some of that tooling spent in, I don't know, Zangief or Balrog. But it is what it is. I definitely like looking at this figure.
You know what I would have liked to have seen them put that tooling budget towards?
What's that?
Cammy, T-Hawk, DJ, Fei Long.
Oh, good point. Yes, why don't you talk about those? Because while they were absent from the toy line, they weren't absent from the awareness within the toy line if you were being introduced to Street Fighter.
Yeah, I missed this the first time around I watched the movie, but the new fighters, those four characters, were in the movie for the most part. Fei Long was kind of substituted for Captain Sawada. They're in the box art. On the Helifighter, Cammy is Guile's co-pilot. And on the Shadow Lu headquarters, they're all on there. Why would they be on there if there was not at least some consideration of releasing them as figures?
It does really, the question that it brings up, I think, is where did those figures stop? You know,
Yeah.
if they appeared on that package, is there anywhere a sculpt for any of those characters, or going backward, a sculpt sheet, or even going back further than that, any kind of concept work at Hasbro for how they were going to approach those?
And I suppose we really can't ignore the fact that they're really in the positions of the G.I. Joe characters when it was the 92 headquarters art. So it is kind of just a character swap while still trying to retain the dynamic look of that artwork, just with new characters and colors. But it does seem like it's a little more thought put into who they swap out, you know?
Yeah, it wasn't like they were including player... Thankfully, they didn't just include the player 1s and player 2s, although that would have made as much sense as them battling each other in the video game. So they could have done that.
I was always hopeful, but yeah, we're not going to get a Cammy in a style that really fits in with these figures. It's the sad truth.
We really should also make sure that we mention that this Street Fighter movie stuff was developed for the G.I. Joe line. I think that it's interesting that we have such a passion as G.I. Joe collectors for all the stuff that didn't come out. And yet, Street Fighter movie stuff kind of counts as a thing that didn't come out as G.I. Joe. The Street Fighter Karate Chopper, which is the Dreadnought Cycle repainted. It was released in the movie toy line, but on the front and the back of the box is the G.I. Joe logo, because there's a sticker that they use that says G.I. Joe that they put on the vehicle, and that is clearly pictured on the back of the box, but then whoever painted the front of the box also painted the G.I. Joe logo onto the action shot of it. So Street Fighter, I know a lot of people discount it, but it's if you've collected the vintage line, why are you avoiding these few figures?
And you really shouldn't discount the Helifighter or the Street Striker either. These are just really good recolors of existing G.I. Joe molds that really fit in well with the vintage toy line.
Definitely don't avoid these. These are some really good toys.
And I think that really takes us to the end of the Street Fighter line. We've really gone into it.
Yes, we have.
What do you think? Are these figures that excite you at all? Let us know in the comments. But now it's time to move on and take a look at something that's a little more than meets the eye.
Yes, and some people would argue that they are not more than meets the eye because they don't turn into anything. Well, that's not exactly true. I think that this toy line does get away with calling itself the Transformers because while the characters themselves don't transform, all of them include items that do transform, sometimes a smaller character, or they came with vehicles that did that. And I'm talking, of course, about these things right next to me, which is the Transformers Action Masters. As a G.I. Joe collector and Transformers collector, that those two great tastes taste great together to me. It's very much a G.I. Joe inspired Transformers line. And I think that at the time, the main thing that it had done was spoke to how much Hasbro realized that the characters of the Transformers were important to their audience.
I had a few as a kid, and I really liked them. I know they didn't transform, but I liked actually having action figures where they were all the same size and they had articulation. You know, I had Transformers that transformed. I had an Optimus Prime that transformed, but I just kind of liked that they were cheap and you could get more than one of them. Because for me, Transformers were kind of few and far between where I got them. And of course, by the time I really was primarily getting those Transformers. It was the tail end of G1, so it really was just Micromasters or Action Masters. I didn't have much of a say at that point.
As G.I. Joe collectors, I think that the comparison was very clear here. I've actually popped apart a figure, a mainframe Action Master, to kind of show some of the similarity to G.I. Joe fans.
You're a brave collector.
They actually didn't end up using the same hardware as G.I. Joe. The O-ring is much smaller, and the T-bar is larger. I probably want to just dig right into the Toy Fair catalog, because obviously with the Street Fighter stuff that we were talking about, I started talking about all the pre-production changes of things. And we could do a one-by-one of all of these Action Masters, but I think that's going to get boring really fast. I think that the key thing to do is to just kind of talk about some of the things that were interesting in that Toy Fair catalog. Probably the first thing that stood out to me when I looked in the 1990 Hasbro Toy Fair catalog was Bonsaitron.
Yeah, the prototype one's a lot cooler looking, honestly. It's very much Cyborg Samurai, and if you didn't know that ahead of time when you're looking at the actual produced figure, I don't know if you would pick that up.
Yeah, you know, the Transformers line as a whole had a lot of samurai-inspired design. So this one being more heavily samurai-inspired was kind of downplayed for the one that got released. So it doesn't really stand out as much. And I think that Bludgeon takes the limelight for being the samurai transformer at the end of the line. But Bonsaitron probably would get a more frequent mention if he had matched this pre-production one that is in here. I do want to note that there's a bit of a placeholder happening here for the Crab. It is actually the Octopunch action figure that is just kind of here repainted to look like it fits with Bonsaitron, but everything on this figure is different. It is head to toe a different sculpt. The shoulders and the helmet definitely have larger points, and then the color on it, the use of green, just really pops. The green is there on the released figure, but then the additional purple that's on the arms, there's something that's overall brighter about the pre-production one. And for whatever reason, you know, people complain about that in the 90s, but I think this is a clear case where brighter would have been better.
Yeah, the purple it's really kind of essential for that figure. I think that's honestly the purple and green are what's drawing me to that, but then again, I really like G2 Megatron, so what do I know?
Right next to him in the catalog is Snarl. Snarl kind of makes me question what exactly was happening with the toy line, because he has these really tiny hands. And part of the appeal of G.I. Joe, and I would think that they were trying to tap into that with Action Masters, is the interchangeability of parts. But Snarl's definitely, in this pre-production form, Snarl's definitely not holding any accessories. That's not going to happen.
Snarl also looks kind of sad with the way he's leaning forward there.
It is. There's actually a couple of these figures that are leaning forward. Moving on to the next Decepticon that I find the most interesting is probably Shockwave. If you look at him here, right away you're going to notice that he doesn't have any of the orange that is on the action figure, and head to toe he is also a different sculpt. Should also mention that these are what appeared in the insert catalog, but I'm looking instead at the 1990 Hasbro Toy Fair catalog because the images are so much bigger and better. Wheeljack is one of the other ones that I find interesting. If you look at the differences here, we'll insert them. I am fully convinced that the Wheeljack that is pictured actually doesn't have legs attached, because he doesn't sit that low in the vehicle. The vehicle's not that spacious. And you can see clearly that they changed the colors of his arms, and that they reversed some of the orange and green, I believe, on his chest.
Here's a aside. They re-sculpted Bonsaitron, they re-sculpted Shockwave. How would you like to be the guy getting told that your entire figure is being redone?
I would probably feel terrible. Inside this catalog, this Hasbro catalog, I probably should also mention that there's 3 assortments, and those pretty much translate currently into waves of figures. And the ones that are more dramatically different are the later ones. So like Bonsaitron, Shockwave, and Snarl, they are all in assortment 3. Although as a customizer, if these figures had not come out and I had gotten like a sculpt that looked like this, I'd be very proud of myself.
Oh, yeah.
And we have said that we actually prefer this Bonsaitron.
Definitely.
Moving on, there's two other characters that I think are really keyly different. One of them has already been brought up on an earlier episode of Articulated Points, and that is Kickoff. We brought him up because he looked kind of like the laser tag helmet was his head. And what's interesting to me is that this earlier Kickoff looks less like that. It just doesn't quite look the same. So I don't know if somebody resculpting it thought that it should look more like laser tag, or if the sculpt input drawings or concept drawings were laser tag, or how that may have happened. But he is quite interesting in the color choices. Skyfall is the last one that I really want to focus on. It's not the James Bond Skyfall, as many times as we've been talking about this. Philip keeps on having James Bond jokes.
Sorry, Adele.
Anyway, he's the one that really interests me the most because he is so dramatically different than what ended up coming out. One of the interesting things about the sculpt of Skyfall that people have noticed, and this is actually true of a couple of the Action Masters, is that they do seem to be inspired. While they are not, they don't have previously existing Generation 1 toys, they do seem to be inspired by previously existing toys, if that makes sense. One of those, I think, is Treadshot. And Skyfall is neat to me because he kind of looks like a Gundam. One of my friends who is super into Gundam, I kind of showed him Skyfall, and I said, well, which one does this look closest to you? And he said, oh, he kind of looks, with those spiky things in the back, he kind of looks like a Zeta Gundam. And I found that interesting because he also pointed out that the Zeta Gundam is one of the few Gundams that actually has an alt mode.
Well, maybe that's what brought it to their radar, because it did have a robot mode and a vehicle mode, so that made it easier to incorporate parts.
Not only do I have the 1990 Hasbro Toy Fair catalog, but there is the 1990 Spring Hasbro catalog, which is a similar catalog. For the most part, the Action Masters in it, there's just a few of them that they don't show. They don't show some of the larger ones. I don't think Megatron's in there. But Skyfall actually has a different name inside that earlier catalog. And his name in the earlier catalog is Fireball. The other thing I want to mention, though, is that in the IDW comic books, Skyfall and Fireball have both made an appearance. And the thing that I found weird is that if you look at them, they're definitely based on Vroom, the Transformers Generation 1 Pretender Vroom, but not entirely, because they are Vroom, but with those spikes that are shared by Skyfall, Fireball, and the Zeta Gundam. Anyway, that kind of rounds out the Toy Fair catalog stuff that I wanted to mention. Although, we did just talk about Kickoff and Skyfall, and there's actually something else interesting pertaining to them. It's going to require me standing up.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yes, the Box 2 Gut Cruncher and the Stratotronic Jet. I just like saying Stratotronic.
Stratotronic.
Here on the back of the box, and this is one of the larger boxes, so it's just kind of good to look at this one. Or look in the Jim Sorensen book, because this is in there as well, and it is on Botch the Crab's website as well. But it is the battle that would be on the back of a lot of Generation 1 boxes. And I think that we just kind of weren't familiar with these characters at the time to have necessarily noticed. But Skyfall and Kickoff are here in the back of Optimus Prime's vehicle. And they're in yet other colors. Kickoff is in mostly yellow, and Skyfall is in mostly green.
Crazy option. You know, you wonder if maybe that was just a weird test shot that he extrapolated on, or if they really were going to plan another radically different color scheme.
Yeah, that's also possible, because I guess we can mention now that in Europe there were some repaints of some of the characters. These two colors did not end up coming out. They really would have made sense to have gotten released. I would love to see if somebody has customized these. I would imagine that they have, because Action Master customs are quite prominent within the Transformers community there for a little while. The other thing I think The other thing that speaks to the fact that we didn't really know who these characters were at the time is if you look within that battle, there is a shot of Mainframe, an Autobot, shooting, I believe is that Jackpot? Another Autobot. So there's... The Autobots didn't... They were like, hey, we're all new here. We don't know each other apart. I'm really sorry about that, buddy.
There's too many.
But I shot you. And then the other thing about this art that I think that it almost calls attention to is the fact that Optimus and Megatron do not have they're not using the guns that they came with. Here's Megatron and Optimus Prime and the accessories that they included. Those are not the accessories that are pictured on the back of the box in the box battle. And I think it kind of speaks to the fact that such a part of Megatron's character is that huge fusion cannon on his arm, right. And not including it was kind of not a fun thing.
There are some iconic things that do feel like they're missing on the Action Masters. I know Starscream's got tiny little baby wings on him, but he just feels like he's missing half his back silhouette, you know?
Yeah, that is true. But you actually pointed me to something when I was collecting my Action Masters. You actually pointed out something to me that kind of blew me away about Megatron. So why don't you take us through that?
This is the result of me going down the rabbit hole in the TF Wiki, just because Transformers is a topic I wanted to know more about, and the TF Wiki is just really entertaining, and it's not so dry that, you know, you get bored of reading it, and then you find yourself peeking around at the weird parts, and you come across something like this, which by all accounts should not be official. And this one is actually a casting of one, so it isn't. But if you have an original, this little fusion cannon is technically an officially licensed accessory for Action Masters Megatron.
Yeah, I guess more information is needed. The wiki even says that, but apparently what happened was a fan who is very not satisfied with Megatron, and this is in Japan, which makes it extra interesting because I don't think that these Action Masters at this point had been released at all in Japan. But he was not quite happy with the way that Megatron looked without that cannon, and so he had created by himself and had hand cast a number of these, and Takara found out about that and were like, well, let's make it official for this show. And what show that was is the information that is kind of needed. From what the wiki says, it was a show in 1992, but they don't know which one. I would love to know which one, just to kind of have that bit of information kind of stored away.
My guess would be One Fest, because that's kind of the Toy Fair equivalent, where they'll also do really low runs of things that are really licensed only for that one convention, but yeah, your guess is as good as mine.
No, that's a really good call, because I've seen things that come out of Wonderfest that people refer to as a garage kit, which would be, you know, handmade and hand cast, low run kind of items. So that would make a lot of sense. Okay, that kind of brings us into looking at Action Masters around the world. I don't want to get too deeply into it because it's kind of a deep topic, but in Europe, they did release the Action Masters, and they released some new key characters like Bombshell, Sideswipe. There were several other characters that were known Generation 1 fan favorites that did end up getting released, but only in Europe. And then there were the Action Masters Elites, which are almost interesting because the entire story of Action Masters is that Optimus Prime traveled into a black hole and found this material called Nucleon and brought it back to the Autobots, and it made them stronger, more powerful, more intelligent, more alive, but unable to transform. So that was the trade-off that they had. Well, the Action Master Elites kind of take that to the next level, because I don't know if it doesn't count as transforming if they are just kind of like robot contortionists or what it may be, because they don't feel like traditional Transformers, and yet they have other modes. Like, this is Windmill. He turns into a Helicopter. And here is Double Punch, the Decepticon that a lot of people will note looks like Scorponok, but then as a second note, you may actually realize that the head more closely resembles Black Zarak from Transformers Master Force. One of the weird things about Action Masters is that you wouldn't have, like, Hook the Action Master and Bone Crusher the Action Master. Instead, you just have Devastator, which I think was the right call as far as characters that kids wanted to have. But it's just so weird to have Devastator just be a guy that's the same size.
Also makes you wonder what happened to the the 6 components who can no longer merge out of that body and are stuck in its existence. Do they still have consciousness, or are they just absorbed into Devastator?
And were they cool with that when it happened? Where Megatron was like, look, we have this Nucleon thing. You're an older toy. We need you to get back in the toy line, so, you know, eat up or do whatever it is you do with this Nucleon. I don't know. But that's kind of brings us to Transformers around the world. That's, you know, the Action Masters around the world. Japan didn't really have Action Masters until there was one release, and I don't actually have it, but Philip, I think you can help me out.
Yeah, so in 2002, Takara put out a New Year edition of Optimus Prime. It was the original 1984 mold, complete with trailer and roller, put out in more cartoon-accurate colors, and it included a matrix of leadership accessory that could fit in his torso. But more than that, it included an Action Master. It's a recolor of the Optimus Prime Action Master in animation colors. And it's really fun. It's, you know, one of the things that bothers me about the original Action Master Prime is those blue forearms, which I think is really more evocative of Jinrai than Optimus Prime, or, you know, it's just not the Optimus Prime I think of when I think of Optimus Prime. So the fact that there is this recolored edition that looks very nicely show accurate, it's one of the prizes of my collection. It's too bad he doesn't come with any accessories of his own, but, you know, I just tracked down an Optimus Prime Action Master gun off of eBay, and that's what he rolls with, and even if it is ridiculously large for what he is.
I probably should add also that the Toy Fair catalog may have skipped over Optimus Prime. He actually was quite different as well. The upper legs on the one inside the original catalog were shown as being silver, so he kind of would have been a little bit closer to the G1 Prime than what ended up coming out, because, you know, in the release his legs were just kind of a blue on top and bottom. Also in Japan, one of the great things to have is this book. Anybody that's a fan of Transformers should just own this book. There's 2 different versions of it. One is the original version, and then one is the Generations Deluxe. It's Transformers Generations, or Transformers Generations Deluxe. The Deluxe version actually has a little bit more information in the back as far as some pre-production sketches. Among those sketches, they include several Action Masters. But in Japan, that really wasn't it for Action Masters, because I think the last thing that we posted was a talking point of me discussing some of the Microman LED Powers series.
Right.
And some Transformers that were included in that toy line. And very, very quickly in that talking point, there also was a picture of the Action Masters Optimus Prime repainted. Now, I don't have the Japanese one, but I do have the one from South Korea,
Sonicon.
Whenever it was re-released. From what?
Sonicon.
Yes, I thought you said Comic Con, but yes, you said Sonicon, which is the brand name. That is Sonicon right there in the bottom, and you could tell from the Korean language on here that this is indeed the Korean version, but the toy is, from what I understand, the same, if not exactly the same, roughly the same. And it is the Action Masters Optimus Prime vehicle portion, repainted and included within the Microman toy line. The posts are the same size for the feet and for the hands, so there was a lot of convenience there. So they didn't really have to alter anything. Here it includes a Microman figure. It does not, like I said, it does not include Optimus Prime. It is just the vehicle portion, but it is in a pearlescent white with a clear green and dark gray and black details and some silver. So it's kind of a nice mix of color. The thing that I thought was most interesting about it is that they really did a good job of adding a lot of deco to it. You can see that there's silver paint and yellow paint in areas that just were not painted on Optimus Prime. One of the cooler things actually inside of it is that little seat in the back there is totally painted black. I like that a lot. It's a really cool thing, and it's old, but it's still cheap. You can actually, I think I looked on eBay before we started recording, and there was one on there, the Sonicon version, for $60 with free shipping. That's actually not that bad for a mint and box toy that's that old. So they're definitely affordable. What's not so affordable is that at Toys R Us in Japan, well, Toys R Us was definitely one of them. The other one may have been somewhere else. I'm not real sure, because information's kind of spotty on this online. They did some repaints of this that were not things that you could just buy. They were a lucky draw. The one that I really like has been posted online by a user named GeoKaiser, and he posted some of the paperwork that came with it as well, which is great. But it is called the Dark Trailer, and they limited that to 100 of them, according to microforever.net. There were only 100 of that trailer made, and it's kind of done in silvers and blacks and golds, and it's very pretty, and there's only 100 of it in the world. Slightly worse, there's only 50 in the world of the Flame Trailer. The part that softens the blow on the Flame Trailer is that it really is just this one again, but with the green parts, the translucent green parts instead in translucent red. But there are only 50 of them, so it is quite rare. So I've seen some pictures of that from eBay, and we maybe can insert some pictures of that here, as well as maybe we can insert GeoKaiser's picture of his Dark Trailer. Definitely seek that out. Hats off to him, not only for being so lucky as to find one of those, but also being a cool dude enough to have posted pictures of it online for guys like me who will probably never own one. I really appreciated being able to have a comprehensive set of pictures. Thank you so much for doing that. The last thing I wanted to do was kind of draw a comparison to the toy line that's roughly another 3 3/4 inch Transformers. It's being done right now by Super 7. Just kind of show a comparison of the two Optimus Primes. Here's Action Masters Optimus Prime, and here's Super 7 Optimus Prime. Action Masters Prime has more articulation, but Super 7 really does do a good job of looking more like animated Optimus, and he has the more traditional Optimus rifle. So there is that. I guess bringing this back around to how we got all this talking started, bringing it back to G.I. Joe one last time. As the story goes, whenever a Hasbro designer brought home some of the Action Masters to play test them with his kid, one of the things that his kid did with them almost instantly was pop G.I. Joe heads on them and play with them with his G.I. Joes as big robotic suit G.I. Joes. And that designer said, wow, that's really kind of cool. I'm going to take some of this idea back to Hasbro and show it off. And what ended up resulting from that was the G.I. Joe Star Brigade Armor Tech figures. And you can see this because if you look at the 1993 G.I. Joe vehicle insert catalog, and you look at the Armor Tech figures, they are all done in silhouette form. They didn't want to show what was going to come out because they were very far from finalized, but they knew that they were going to go forth with making them. And they are the silhouettes of the package art for the Action Masters. Okay, so that brings us to our final topic of the day. I think we mentioned that we are going to really switch gears now, since we've kind of spent some time talking about G.I. Joe and offshoots of G.I. Joe. One of the greatest toys of the 1980s has recently been teased, and shown. I guess they're maybe already available. Is that right? Why don't you tell us more about this, Philip?
So it's 2020 right now when we're recording this. We're all stuck in a quarantine lockdown, and a movie called Ghostbusters Afterlife was due to come out. Unfortunately, it's gotten pushed back to next year, but the toys that Hasbro had the license for have started trickling out. And part of those is actually a line, I think it's exclusive to Walmart, of retro Ghostbusters figures, where they're actually taking the old Kenner Ghostbusters and re-releasing them. I'm not sure if they're straight molds or if they're actually slightly different like they did with the Star Wars figures, but these are the original 4 Ghostbusters. They all came with variations of this proton pack. The stream would be a different color, but you know, the wand could connect to the backpack and then it could go around the figure by plugging into a hole on the back, and then you'd, you know, twirl it and you'd have to make the the sounds yourself. But this was the basis of a line that lasted for several years, and it's a very classic toy line. It was definitely one of the toy lines that defined my childhood. I still have my firehouse set right over there. I'm not going to change the camera. You don't want to see what it looks like over there. But there were 2 issues with the original line that I'm sure would be appreciated to be addressed. The first issue is that you never actually got an in-scale Slimer figure. For me, it's not so big a deal. I came across as a kid this Slimer, who was in a little 3-pack of Ghostbusters licensed squirters. He's got a little hole in the back of the throat. You dip him in water, squish it, he sucks up the water, and then you can squeeze it out. And that's actually pretty in scale. So that's what I used. But again, I don't think it was Kenner that put this out, so you kind of had to know it was out there to get it. The second thing is that they put out Janine and Louis Tully figures, but never quite in the way we wanted. This is the first Janine figure. You'll notice it's a season 1 design, but she's got a pink bodysuit. In the cartoon, the pink bodysuit is eventually what Janine started wearing when she dressed up as a Ghostbuster. Her first appearance in the cartoon was actually using one of Peter's spare suits. Then they kind of gave her a pink jumpsuit when they made this feature, which is one of the Screamin' Heroes lines. And of course, it can't take a proton pack because it's a solid on the back. But later on, we got this figure of Janine. And this one, you can see it's got the one elbow pad, which is consistent with that first line of Ghostbuster figures, where they only had the one elbow pad instead of the 2 for some reason. And it's got a hole in the pack that can accept a proton pack. So she could conceivably be re-released, and hopefully in the colors that she wore in the cartoon, which again was more of a bubblegum pink when she had her own costume. And in that same wave, they put out the first Louis Tully figure. I don't actually have that one. I have the second release, but he is, again, in his own Ghostbusters uniform. But the colors don't match what he had in the cartoon. The cartoon is sort of like an olive drabish brown-green sort of deal. But again, it's its own unique color. And this mold can, again, hold on to a proton pack. So, you know, it's just one of those things where if they still have the tooling for this, for them to make these characters in the colors that they weren't available in the first time around, and for us to sort of complete the roster. I should point out, though, again, this is a Janine with a first season look in a Ghostbusters costume, which for the pink suit wouldn't be accurate. Because of some sort of interference from higher ups, the voice actress was replaced, and the model was changed around. So she kind of went from a snarky New Yorker to the teen mom's big sister role. And weirdly, she kept getting redesigned so often, they ended up even making a cartoon episode to address all those changes over the years about what was going on.
That's interesting. Well, she also, she even seemed a little bit different with her style from Ghostbusters 1 to Ghostbusters 2 as far as the movies go.
Well, I mean, in real life, changing your hairstyle and changing your clothes every day isn't Changing your clothes every day isn't a big deal, and changing your hairstyle every couple of months isn't a big deal. But in children's American animation in the 1980s, that just doesn't happen.
Am I wrong? Because my understanding of those figures that you just showed is that originally Lewis did include a proton pack, but Janine did not, even though her back accepts one. Is that right?
No. So this wave, for some reason, came with sort of these weirdly, mildly transforming accessories, and some of them did fit as backpacks. For some reason, this one does not, but I think they were all, aside from Janine and Lewis, the rest of the figures from that wave were reuses of the original molds, so they had the backpack hole on them. So some could take backpacks, and I think they just wanted to keep it consistent across the wave in case kids wanted to switch around the accessories.
Yeah, I kind of see this as a huge opportunity, to be honest, because if you're Hasbro, there's definitely a demand. It's nice that for the characters that aren't part of the 4 core Ghostbusters, that there may be a slightly higher collector demand for something from those characters. And they probably could get away, I'm just saying, I could be wrong, they probably could get away with doing both. Like, make the color that you want that never came out, and just make reissues of these ones as well while they're at it. I mean, why not?
They had legitimate Ghostbuster costumes. They didn't always participate, and I think there's really only one episode where all 6 of them are in uniform at the same time, but it is something worth doing.
Yeah, I think probably the most positive thing about all of that is how well those figures have gone over online and the excitement for them. You know, people are really excited for those Ghostbusters. Vintage carded Ghostbusters are not cheap, so in order to be able to get one that is a nice reproduction that looks good, to have it in the package, people are just, you know, they're gobbling them up.
I kind of want them just so I can get the intact Proton streams, because most of mine have broken over the years.
But I think if they do anything else before they move on to doing any of the Fright features or any of those other characters, they need to address Janine and Lewis for sure. I agree. This is definitely what needs to happen.
And that's really all we're talking about for this segment. So we're making it nice and quick. We're not drawing it out too long, and hopefully you appreciate that we're pretty much at the end of this episode. So what do you think about that too? You want to see Janine and Lewis in their cartoon colors? Do you want to not see them at all? Do you not consider them part of your Ghostbusters cast? With Action Masters, how do you feel about that? Is that a line you collect? Is this something you appreciate or something you just can't have in your collection? Let us know.
I like how we managed to include like the segments of G.I. Joe and Transformers. We managed to include all in one episode the 2 biggest segments that a lot of people refuse to accept even exists. Street Fighters and Action Masters. You talk to the people who collect those vintage lines and be like, yeah, I collect everything except for those. We're just putting them all in one episode.
It's what we do, man.
Because, hey, I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it. And we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.